Welcome to Diversitas. Welcome back to Diversitas. Diversitas is a podcast at the crossroads of diversity, business, and culture. And we are so happy today to have on our program Michael Spain. I like him already because his name is Michael. Somebody had good sense. Mike is the Director of Design Education for AIA Philadelphia. Mike has been a longtime architect. He has worked as an architect in and around the city of Philadelphia for, I don't want to say many years, Mike. I don't want to age you that much, but you're a seasoned architect. Let's just say that.
Yes. I like that.
Right. He's also and now he is the Director of Design Education for AIA Philadelphia. He's also a board member of Philanoma, we want to talk about that. And he is a leader of Jade Philadelphia, and we're going to talk about that. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. Really appreciate you inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk about the things that we're doing and that's important in the field of design education.
I appreciate that. So let's get started. You know, as I was preparing for this program, and I interact with some architects during the development process, helping clients with their development needs and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I thought about as a lawyer, right, and this is always kind of at the forefront of my mind, particularly as someone running a minority firm, is that one of the hardest things for us, meaning lawyers and professional service providers, to sell is our intellectual property. In other words, Black intellectual property is not necessarily, it can be, but not necessarily in high demand. Can you tell me about your experience, as an architect, and whether or not you had similar feelings during the course of your journey?
Yeah, Michael, that question really hits home, not only to me personally as an architect, but the profession in general. There are often times where it's a little challenging for the general public to understand and see our worth. And when you're picking a profession, you want to be confident in that, yeah, people do understand your talent, your worth, and your contribution. And some of the challenges, you're doing buildings, you're creating things, but what impact do they have? How are spaces affected by what you do? How is human behavior affected by what you do? How is the sustainability of communities that people live in affected by what you do? What's good design? All of those things are challenges along the course of the career. And I think one of the ways that we have to make sure that the public knows our worth is being intimately engaged with them, being part of the communities that we live in, and having those people understand the impact and importance of good design. I think once we get to that level, it's a lot easier for people to take in that information and understand what good architecture does, what good design in the built environment does. Developers know our worth, people that use the buildings know our worth, and we then feel and see the impact that we have.
Right. What led you to architecture? How did you get into this field?
Sure. And we'll be talking about some of the pipeline stuff and things like that.
Oh, absolutely. No question.
Yeah. Well, my experience is kind of aligned with what we're doing now, but I had an older brother who was an artist and much older than I was. And much like little brothers do, they look up to their older brothers. And I used to always ask him to draw things for me. As he got older and he started to hang out with his friends, become interested in girls, and I wasn't always tagging along. I remember so distinctly one day he literally said, "Draw it yourself." So I started drawing, became fairly good at it at a young age, took some art classes in Philadelphia public school system, all of that. And I also got exposed to the field through the show called The Brady Bunch, where Mike Brady was an architect.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
those two things together combined, my interest in drawing and art and the exposure of architecture through a television program piqued my interest. Again, I'm a product of the Philadelphia public school system. So at 8th grade, I had a choice of choosing a high school. I chose
Right.
Dobbin Votech in North Philadelphia.
Oh,
That
poor
had
old Dobbins. My mother went to
that had
Dobbins.
a 3-year architectural program. And I had a fantastic teacher, Joseph Coyle, who really invested in me, encouraged me. And I was lucky enough to get in a summer program at Cornell University between my junior and senior year. I was able to test my skills coming from an urban school environment
Right.
among international students, national students, and did fairly well. Well enough where I applied and got invited to attend Cornell University. And after graduating, came back to Philadelphia, and that's where I launched my career. So that's how I became interested, and that was the path to education and then the profession for me.
My mother went to Dobbins, and you know, a lot of good people came out of Dobbins, man.
Yeah. There was a really strong legacy of architects, Black architects, even dating back to maybe the late 60s and slightly past my generation, where they've come into the profession because they attended Dobbins.
I went to engineering and science.
Okay.
And in my freshman year there, we had to take an architecture class, a drawing class. We had to take an architectural drawing class. And I was like, oh no, this is not for me. It's too, first of all, I don't have an artistic bone in my body. And now you have to draw with you know, the rulers that you used to have to draw with and the instruments that you used to have to utilize.
Yeah.
I was like, no,
digital.
No, absolutely not. So
yeah, you know, Michael, that is a big part how we communicate graphically, but you really have to have a passion for this profession to want to create and have an impact that carries you through. I mean, once you get the kind of like skills, so to speak, and they're set, there's that whole other realm that we have to start to address and deal with, not only to be successful, but to remain sane and productive in this profession.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that because to me, I mean, again, when I think about that field, and it's even, to me, it's even harder when I think about your journey, you know, and you went to Cornell for your degree in architecture. I mean, I was reading somewhere that the number of African Americans going into architectural programs right now is so incredibly low. What do you attribute that to?
I think there are a number of things, Mike, and but I'm gonna speak to the first piece, which I think is just awareness. One, the profession in general traditionally has not done enough to reach out to BIPOC and Latinx communities or communities in general. You know, the architectural profession was felt to be kind of like, you know, a old boys network. There really was no effort and reason to reach out to the public. Lawyers, doctors, all the other professions had visibility and outreach. Architects were kind of like insulated. So you take that in the traditional model, and then for African Americans and Latinx and BIPOC populations, not being able to see a person that looks like you. Understand that there's the possible opportunity for you to be a designer. So awareness is one of the first things. Being able to be seen. One of the second things is access. All right. So if you see this, what is the path and how do you create that path and gain access to the profession? Are you able to get instruction? Are you able to get mentors? Are you able to start to write your path or see your path to this? Me, I was lucky. There was a Votech school that had an architectural program.
Right.
So that was my path starting to be set, and being able to understand that what the profession was about and what it might take for me to get there. And then finally, there's opportunity. You can have all of the skills, you can have all of the training, but if you don't have the opportunity that the profession did not provide as much for BIPOC and Latinx and Indigenous people, you're not going to be able to succeed, move forward, and so on. So that's why our numbers have been low, as well as the institutionalized racism and or view of our worth and contribution to the professions. Again, there's a network that has been traditionally been set that is changing and has changed somewhat. But even from 1968, Whitney Young had addressed the National AIA Convention and just gave it to him about, you are invisible. You know, you have not made contributions. Why is that? This is 50 years ago, right? And the numbers are still low. 2% of the architects in the United States are Black.
I think
0.3% are Black women.
Did you say 0.3?
0.3.
Wow.
Yes.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I would agree with you. It would seem to me that number one, exposure is a huge thing, right? Because, you know, as we grow up, I mean, most of us have to go or engage with a doctor at some point. That's number one. A lot of our families, if not us individually, have to deal with lawyers at some point for some reason. There are plenty of opportunities, or certainly more opportunities, for people of color to be able to engage and then to envision what it would be like to be a doctor or to be a lawyer. And with architecture, it would seem to me that you guys are kind of a little bit removed, in the sense that your clients are huge institutions, are developers. Like, your clients, generally speaking, are not what I will call everyday folk. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so it's hard to envision something that you have absolutely no ability to see or be exposed to, right?
100%. I mean, I've made it a point to, you know, in neighborhoods that I live in, let my neighbors know what I do. Let their children know what I do. Be engaged. If there's an issue that has to deal with the built environment, that I might be visible in some sense, or a resource. And that can go a long way. And again, I don't think architects have been visible across the board, not just BIPOC, across the board in that way as much. But that culture is changing a bit. So hopefully over a period of time, we'll be able to see that impact.
That's my next question. I mean, you mentioned the AIA. I know that you work with the AIA. I know that you've been involved with the AIA before even becoming the director there. Do you get a sense in the architectural community that there is an interest in trying to figure out how to engage more people of color into this profession?
There's definitely an interest, and you can see it in the programs that I know we'll be talking about in a little bit, but there seems to be more of a social consciousness with the newer generations, and understanding, again, the impact of what good design and engagement means. There is the program that I'm heading. There is Jade PHL. There are committees in the AIA that address urban design issues and planning issues. And there are people, you know, out front that are really kind of embracing this, I'll call it this movement. And a lot of it, again, is also pushed by BIPOC leaders in the design field, where we're becoming more visible and more vocal. So we're getting support from, slowly but surely, the larger architecture community, but you see a lot of leaders now that are people of color that are starting to take on the mantle. So we're encouraged by that, but still have yet to see real concrete evidence and information. But that's going to take time. That's
Right.
going to take effort. It's going to take partners that are also, not BIPOC, that the general architectural community and society in general needs to be part of this also.
Oh, not only does it have to be part of it, it has to be integral to it, because at the end of the day, I mean, you just said what the numbers are, right? At the end of the day, there aren't that many people of color in these firms who have a voice or are able to have a voice that is sustainable over the long term.
Yeah.
To be able to make the changes that need to be made, right? Tell me about what you're doing now. So I know that you spent a good deal of your career working for private firms. What led you to this particular opportunity with AIA?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Mike, so around 30 years, I've been primarily a designer in the architectural firms, and quite a few, and has actually taken the lead in some of the firms that I have for the design effort. Parallel to that, I've always been involved with the education aspect. The first generation of the program that I'm leading now, I was a part of coming fresh out of college and working 3 years in the profession, was able to volunteer and teach kids K through 12 about some design education. I found that I could communicate these ideas well. This led to a partnership with a colleague that was also teaching. I was an assistant at Bryn Mawr with him, Sam Motion, for a while. That led to an opportunity at community college to teach for about 2 years, which led to another opportunity at Jefferson, where I've been an adjunct professor for about 20 years. So my passion has been design and education. I volunteered 3 years ago to co-chair the rejuvenation of the O program. And this was a volunteer effort. I was happy to do it.
Right.
To see if we can start it up again. And things kind of fell into place, and maybe it was divine intervention or recognizing my calling or whatever, but there was an opportunity now to be paid to do this full-time and to kind of realize what could be the expansion of design education throughout the city of Philadelphia. My passions were strongly there at that point. There was a point in the profession traditionally where, I thought maybe there's something different I can do, or there was a wall that I could no longer push as strongly as I would like to. Here was an opportunity to use those two passions in the education field to expand the experience, exposure, and all the things I talked about, and kind of lead that. And that's what brought me to the Center for Architecture and Design, where I'm now director of the design education program.
When you look at the opportunities for kids to be exposed to architecture and design in the public school system currently, where are the opportunities right now?
Yeah, Michael, there weren't, with the exception of this program and a few schools. Actually, West Philadelphia High School has a CTE program that has an architectural program. Dobbins no longer has it. The Dobbins, Bach, and Mastbaum were the schools where you went to actually get some of this in high school.
Right.
And in the lower grades, because a lot of the arts classes and in wood shop and all of those things rarely or no longer exist in the school. So there was a void. Oh, let me mention the Charter High School for Architecture and Design.
Yes, right.
Which had been in, I was part of the founding board and did well for almost 20 years.
Right.
The pandemic hit. There were some challenges that the school had, but the course of learning design, it was very, very strong. But that school is no longer here. So there's a void that is kind of like left, right?
If I could say something, it
Sure.
to me is outrageous, right? Because I'm sitting here listening to you talk, and I'm thinking about Dobbins. I'm thinking about Mastbaum. So Mastbaum doesn't exist anymore, right? Dobbins
For architecture, yeah, yep. And Dobbins still, it's a school, but the program in terms of design and
okay,
architecture, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Dobbins is alive and well.
Dobbins is alive and well. I don't think I knew that. I thought Dobbins had.
No, it is.
But even still, I mean, just no. I mean, in one of the largest cities in our country, for there to be no way for public school children to be exposed to this, to me, is outrageous.
Yeah,
it's outrageous.
It's a challenge. I mean, we all know the state of Philadelphia public schools, and for whatever reasons, there's some very challenging obstacles that the school district is always facing, and I understand that. But where we think we could fit in is becoming engaged with the school district, and actually, we're entering a partnership with the school district to gain access to these schools, a formal partnership, which I think is going to be great. But allowing us to engage the curriculums that they have. So it's not just an adjunct to what you're learning, but a complement and also integrated with what the students are learning to not only expose them. And Mike, I don't want to give the impression that we're trying to get each student in each class to become an architect.
Sure.
But we want to improve their social and emotional learning. We want to improve their creative thinking so they can apply that to their English class, right, their math class.
Right.
They can apply it to when they go home and join their community groups and organizations. So we want to be able to do that. But this is how we think we can reintroduce some of those things that were in Chad, some of that creative thinking that the schools may not have now, by being invited in, showing what our program can do, and allowing children to be exposed and hopefully understand that this might be an option for them as they get older.
So will the school district, how will it work? Will the school district, place you in certain schools, or do you come up with an initial list? How does that work?
So what we have done, because we were working as volunteers, which allowed us to go into some of the schools that we had first engaged 3 years ago. So we were seeking out engaged principals, administrators, and teachers, and engaged is the key word there. We were not looking for classrooms where we would be coming in for a day and it was all fun. We were looking for a teacher that said, what can you do with my social studies class to learn how to build a community? A math teacher, what can you do with my math class to understand structures? And that they are fully engaged and makes that part of their lesson plan over 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
So I would say, handpicked or looked for really engaged partners in that. And we were able to get, over the course of 3 years during our pilot, maybe 8 schools. When we officially launched this fall, we were in 4 schools. All the teachers were engaged. We were in multiple classrooms in each school. And this was our first kind of like launch laboratory, making sure that what we did in the previous 3 years actually works. And it worked well. What we're doing with the school district now is saying to the schools that they have worked with and know that there are teachers and administrators that will like programs like this, say, hey, we have something for you now. Here's a design education program that just might fit with your teacher in your classroom. So why don't we hook you guys up, see if the marriage is great, and enter that and start the program. So they will be feeding us schools that they believe match us, but also meets their expectations. Because I have to say, having met with them, they have a really good, they envisioned a really good outcome and program to engage the schools that they're connecting with. They're very intentional about this effort. And I applaud them for that, because I think over the next 5-10 years, we'll see the fruits of our labor.
So when you go into a school, are you yourself going into the classroom? Are you doing teacher training so that the teacher understands what your curriculum is, and then they kind of, they take it to the children? Like, how does that work?
Right. As much as I'd like to be in every classroom, and I really would.
I mean, I'm just saying, you got that kind of energy, Mike. You might pull it off.
I wish I could, but I can't. Myself, along with my program coordinator, Liza Niles, we recruit volunteers in the design profession. And it's not just architects, it's landscape architects, interior designers, industrial designers, textile designers, designers that might have an interest in teaching, but also teaching in the target audience. Again, we're not limited to BIPOC and Latinx, but that's where our focus is.
Right, right.
And being able to engage students and teach them about the design process, thinking, and it comes from a built environment tilt, but it's not limited to that also. And one of the things we have to be conscious of, Mike, and we talked about it earlier, we don't have the numbers where every classroom that we go in, we're going to see a person of color in front of that class.
Of course.
We just don't have the numbers.
Right.
So we have to reach out to the general architectural population who may or may not be familiar with teaching and engaging in the demographics that we're looking at.
Right.
So we do have teacher and volunteer training. We kind of like have 6 points that we really want to make sure that they understand. And part of it is being authentic to the students, and also training the volunteers that there are certain mores and guidelines and so on that you might need to be aware of in terms of engaging the students, because we want the experience to be so great that it becomes a success. And in that training, the teachers are involved too, because they really control the culture of the classroom, right? And for our volunteers to be able to lean on them. So through that training, through that engagement, through giving them knowledge of, quote unquote, quite frankly, how to act, we allow them to then use their design skills to engage the students and be able to do that freely. And they set up a 4 to 6 week curriculum that we review and say, hey, this is great, this really hits, or this is something we haven't thought about that we would like to adopt. And we make that part of our library and part of our program. And again, between 4 to 6 weeks, they will execute this in a classroom, 1 day a week for about 2.5 hours. And the product that we've seen has been great. One of the things that really energizes me is to see how creative these kids are. Like, I was in a kindergarten class last semester, kindergarten, and they were able, on their level, to grasp certain concepts about shapes and how shapes go together to make something bigger that might be part of a community. That's like amazing. You can do that and then carry that on to upper grades. It will really pay off in the long run and start to create something that we hope will be sustainable for a long period of time.
So is your programming currently geared towards just one section, like i.e. elementary school, junior high school, or does it go K through 12? Where are you with that?
Yeah. So our main focus is in the middle schools. That's where we think the most impact can happen, because this is where students start to really think about where they may or may not go, where they start to consider what career choices would be. We always know that that can change. You can be in college and change your idea.
Right.
But this is where we think you have to grab them to get that exposure, because they can grasp that and understand it. That's our main focus. Our K through 5 is really more, if I can put it into a relational type of aspect, is it's show and tell. It's like, this is what you can do and be active in, right? Like fireman, policeman, architect now is in there, right? Or designer is now in there. And if they had that interest, again, middle school with the focus. But after middle school, that's that pathway thing we're starting.
Right.
High school, the curriculum becomes a little more engaged. We start to really ask the student what's important to them. The projects are based around maybe not as much of the curriculum, but what impact would you like to have?
Right.
So that's our K through 5, is kind of like the exposure, show and tell type of thing. The middle school is like, we want to really grab them at that point. Like, if you have that interest, this is what we can do. High school is further developing that. and then hopefully leading to higher education where they can start and continue their path.
So with your volunteers, what's the time commitment for them? Like what are they giving you and the program in terms of time when they go into these schools?
Right. So hard time, again, is about 2 hours or 2.5 hours in a classroom a week, for 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the teacher. Outside of that, there's prep time, where they have to prepare for the class. It might be an hour or two, making sure they have the materials, the lesson plan. At the end of the program, we're asking that they put together a wrap-up document that actually records everything that was done in terms of photos and models and so on. So again, 2 or 3 hours, hard time a week. You had some prep time on that. And then wrapping up, and also developing curriculum, which might be over a course of 2 weeks.
So they do
really
have a hand in developing the curriculum for their.
It's mandatory that they sit with the teacher and they talk about what they're trying to do to develop that. Again, we want to try to get as much success as possible in the classroom. So I would say over a period of 8 weeks is where we really have them engaged. And after that time, again, if we've had repeat, volunteers because they really enjoy it. As a matter of fact, the first generation of architects that were in this program, a lot of them are still in the profession and were part of the volunteer group 20, 25 years ago that are now working in the profession. So that's how that carries on. But that's the commitment and level of volunteerism that we ask for.
Awesome. So I want to switch gears for a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like it's really related, but I know that you have been involved with other organizations who are, really kind of trying to address this pipeline issue. And, we kind of teased it at the beginning. I know that what you're doing on a day-to-day basis really is trying to impact the pipeline issue by providing exposure to students from K to 12 as to what the possibilities are in design and architecture, right? I know there's some other organizations that you're also involved with. Justice Alliance for Education is one. Can you tell me about that? What is that?
Yeah, so Justice Alliance for Design Education was an idea from our executive director and Rob Fleming, who's a colleague of mine that taught at Jefferson University. He's now at University of Penn. And another colleague of mine that I've done a lot of educational work with, Taya Nguyen, were the initial kind of thought leaders. Yeah.
Love Taya.
I do too. She is what I affectionately call my work wife. We've worked together on so many things. She's an amazing individual, and I'm fortunate to have worked with her for such a long time. So they were the original thought leaders on this Jade PHL. And what Jade is a consortium of educators, administrators, professionals, students that really want to affect design education, and primarily at the post-secondary or secondary level in colleges. We found that, there is a lack of diversity. There is still the institutional obstacles that students and schools in general have to overcome. So Rob, Taya, and Rebecca thought that we can start to form this in a formal way and start to address these issues about the profession, about the institutionalism that holds back students. And the goals are to advocate for justice in this area, to build equity, to have a supportive experience for the students in the schools. And in 2019, JPHL officially launched, and we've done a number of things so far in terms of educating students as well as administrators and bringing the design community here in Philadelphia together. There are 5+ architectural programs in Philadelphia, and that is the most in any city in terms of concentrated design programs
in the country.
Yes,
Is that
there's
right?
Community College of Philadelphia, there's Temple University, University of Penn, there's Jefferson, and there's Drexel. All of these schools in one city. And it's unfortunate that even with that and the population of Philadelphia of African Americans, that there are not more students in these schools, that there's not more interest in it. So we think that we can create a model, JPHL can create a model here in Philadelphia that might be adopted by other cities and other organizations where we can address the same issues about the higher education absence of instructors, students, and just the space to learn in a different way or from a different tilt than what has traditionally been done.
So what Jade Philadelphia is doing so they are focused primarily on what's happening in these colleges and universities, correct?
Yes, that was the initial impetus. So
Okay.
I mentioned Rob, Taya, and Rebecca. My role in JPHL is being able to give them enough students to be able to start to, or to continue to affect this change.
Right.
So there is a pathway that Jade has kind of like identified, and it starts at kindergarten and goes through the K through 12 program. And then there's the offshoot programs, like you mentioned the other pipeline, there's Philanoma that has a summer camp. There's ACE Mentoring that has a focus on construction industry. There are other kind of like pathways to this, but ultimately it leads to this higher education piece that will then formally lead to the profession. And one of the things that we want to make sure is that we're creating this pipeline, that you have all of these new, fresh, and innovative ideas coming from a different population to the profession. But the one thing that we want to be very conscious and careful of, you can create this freshwater pipeline, but if it leads to a toxic stream or environment, what good is it?
Yes.
So we're also working on that to see that what we've prepared will be well received.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking about it, just not only this, but just STEM in general, right? And how there is a need for just so much. I mean, it's kind of like we're in a triage, you know, situation with our children and their exposure, consistent exposure, good exposure to STEM, right? Because, you know, I'm a public school kid. I went to E&S, as I told you before. I went to Masterman before that. I was fortunate in terms of the kind of education that I got, right? As I say, I got. But in any event, I just fear for this generation that they don't have the same kind of opportunities I had when I was growing. It's like when I went to Carnegie Mellon for undergrad, there were programs there that were there to make sure, or at least to give us the opportunity to be able to get through that school, right? Because that school decided that they wanted to invest their dollars into making sure that they could create a pipeline of graduates of color, right? And they were very successful in doing that. But in order to get there, you have to still have a kind of a floor that you're working with in terms of education, in order to get to the Carnegie Mellons, in order to get to the Cornells, in order to get to wherever. Like it doesn't have to be, you know, Ivy League school. I mean, just to get to that next level. And I fear for our children because I don't believe that they're getting what they need to be able to even qualify for programs that you're talking about in terms of helping them and getting them through to the next level.
Yeah, and that's part of the, I would say, middle school to high school kind of piece of
Yes.
that pipeline that we're really trying to draw, and we're working with partners to do that. I think the unique thing about the program that I'm heading up is that we're looking at being fully integrated with the curriculum. That's kind of like the niche we're working with, how we're integrated with the curriculum. But outside of that, how do we start to package and create these opportunities by having opportunities like a summer camp that focuses on design,
Yes.
that Philadelphia does,
Yes.
right? How we partner with ACE Mentoring that looks at the construction industry and architecture and engineering, and how we can set those students up with scholarships, with internships,
Right.
with real exposure to the profession.
Right.
So when they get to a Carnegie Mellon, a Temple, a Jeff, a Cornell, they have a strong basis.
Right.
But not only once they get there, Mike, and here's the challenge that Jade is, how can they be sustained in those environments?
Yes.
Because there are biases, right? There are challenges, cultural challenges, not for lack of on our part, but how we might be viewed, or how a student even wants to approach a design project or process, but the professor doesn't understand that point of view, or has an unrecognized bias against that approach. How can that affect the student? How can it affect the product outcome? Those things are what also needs to be addressed. We can set the table, right? And you're right, we're trying to do that and package that. Once you get there, how are we helping these students sustain a level of success, matriculate, and graduate,
right,
to be able to go into the profession?
Well, that's all good stuff, Mike, and I appreciate that conversation. We have another little segment before we let you go, though.
Sure.
And it is called Rapid Fire. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about you.
All right.
You know all about your great work. I'm sure the audience would like to kind of hear what you got to say. So first of all, what was the best piece of advice you ever got?
Be involved. And that was from my high school teacher. Just be engaged, be involved, join something. That involvement gives you experience, but it also gives you exposure.
And on the flip side, what's the worst piece of advice you ever got?
It was kind of like, take your time. Maybe don't be as upfront. And it came from that other place also. So yeah, I had to navigate that a little bit.
What's one word that describes you?
And I think I can probably apply this to many areas, is passion.
I love that. What's a talent that you have that most people don't know about?
Mike, that's a tough one.
Come on, man.
Well, let's see. I don't know if I would call it a talent, but I am aspiring to be a saxophonist.
Okay.
So
that's a good one.
Mike, I can't place it as a talent as yet.
When did you start?
A couple of years ago. Earnestly, I've had like a tenor, student tenor sax for a while.
Okay.
But never really kind of like got into it. So yeah, that's again, I won't call it a talent, but it's something that I'd like to aspire to at some point.
Well, along those lines, what's your favorite type of music?
I'm a traditional jazz fan.
Okay.
And I put the emphasis on traditional, and not to be a jazz snob, but I'm not a big smooth jazz fan,
Right.
but I
Straight
love
ahead.
a lot of the traditional stuff.
Who's your favorite saxophone player of all time?
Stan Getz.
Stan Getz. Interesting. Is that what you
Yeah.
aspire to? You aspire to the smooth stylings of Stan Getz?
Yeah, a bit. But I loved Coltrane, and but Stan was the guy that got me there first.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And then I was able to kind of like grasp the others. But he's my favorite.
It's interesting because you hit the nail on the head. Like, so it's almost like you're supposed to be a Coltrane fan. So I am a Coltrane fan. But my favorite musician, at least jazz musician, is Monk. And the reason why it's Monk, because Monk brought me to the show. Like I got it
Right.
through him, right?
Uh-huh.
So I absolutely get that. That's awesome. What's your biggest success?
Honestly, Mike, if I were to think of like legacy stuff, I hope that it will be seen that my biggest success is how I've been able to either inspire or promote the students and the young people that I've come into contact with, and that they will and can do great things. Some of it is seen, but I think maybe still has yet to be seen, and I hope and pray that it does. I mean, I have some buildings and things that I'm proud of, that I hope will last somewhat as a legacy, but I hope that would be the success that I can talk about in years to come.
Biggest failure?
And I would say a few. I won't speak to biggest, but not taking the opportunities that have been presented to me at times, and seeing where that could have possibly have led me, I would consider a failure, even though maybe not fully realized as a try and fail, but never to have tried at all. So that's why I place it in that failure category.
Right. But I believe that you're where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, and that kind of helps with that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Because you don't know where that road, you can kind of see the destination down there and it looks good, but you don't really know what's down there until you get there, right?
Right.
You just don't know, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's just life. Are you reading any books right now?
I'm not. I can't say, Mike, that I'm a big book reader. I'm maybe more articles and articles and topical things. But the book that I have started to pick up, which I'm a little behind, is the White Fragility book, which speaks about how white people have traditionally not been able to, and some of the ways that they may be able to grasp and be part of what needs to happen in terms of bringing equity and diversity. So I've touched it, but I really need to be more engaged with that.
Last question: do you watch any TV?
I do. My TV watching is generally around sports, but I do have kind of like the Netflix thing. The latest thing that I just started picking up was Ozark. They have a new season.
Did you just start watching that, or did you? Or you? Just...
No, I've watched it before, but now that the new season has started, I've watched that. And I do the Netflix and chill thing every once in a while. So
yeah, we just started watching Ozark again. It looks
like it's
going to be a wild ride, so we'll just have to see. Michael Spain, really appreciate you coming on with us today and sharing with us your insights. We greatly appreciate your time.
Michael, thank you again for having me, letting me speak about the things that we're doing, and how we hope to impact the design education community and just the community as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And to our audience, thank you again for being a part of our show. We look forward to having the conversation and keeping it going. Until then, take care.